welcome to Risky Thoughts with Rob and Roy.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Roy. Hello, fellow thinkers. Okay, so I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately, and everyone has like a name for their like listeners. So, I think because our
Risky Thoughts.
So we're gonna call you guys thinkers. You guys are our thinkers, and we're gonna think about something today regarding Harry Styles wearing a dress. I know this is old news, but me and Rob are kind of old people, and the news kind of gets to us a little bit late.
We catch on a little late in the game.
No, exactly. So, is it good? Is it bad? What we're going to cover in this episode is we're going to kind of give you our take as cisgendered males. Okay.
Correct.
We just had an interview with one of Rob's best friends, brothers, who is a gay individual, and he lives kind of in Amsterdam. So, and he kind of taught us a good amount about this. We're conservative males, changes to masculinity are tough, and we're going to talk about it because this is where acceptance of other males displaying these characteristics happens, right? It doesn't happen from people just scaring us and punishing us. No, we're going to talk about it in our inner circle, and you guys are our inner circle, and we're going to try to explore that today. So once again, we're going to talk about Harry Styles, this kind of idea of masculinity maybe broadening, right? Rather than calling it a very feminine thing, I would like to add perhaps this could be a new characteristic, along with other things. And I'm kind of throwing this one out there, like even the idea of the simp, right? Like these are characteristics of like males that we're seeing today, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to see how we can kind of round it off and see how we can end up perhaps accepting it or finding a common ground. And I'm definitely left leaning and I'm right leaning, so there's parts of me that don't necessarily want to give up that old world masculine man who's like smoking cigarettes and that was a dumb thing and he's always like yelling and fighting and guns and all that shit. But there's something definitely seductive about it, right? And like we could even start with like the attraction of it. But Rob,
so okay.
Well,
first things first. To piggyback off our last episode, we are Canadian, or 2 episodes ago, I should say. So we are centered politically more than the United States is. So people think of Americans being left or right winged. We don't really fall in that category. We are kind of closer in the middle, which is why, despite our tendencies to be right leaning, we're still relatively centric on the political scale.
Absolutely.
And so our openness to the left ideas is a lot more. We're a lot more open than the typical right-winged or the stereotypical right-winged person, right? We're not far right. We're not even close. We're pretty much center. But yeah, I think what we need to do in order to go down this discussion of understanding whether or not we think Harry Styles wearing a dress is okay, is the new thing for men to do, or whatever, we have to understand first what masculinity is. Mm-hmm. And so, taking my typical approach to anything that requires rational thought, I want to start by understanding the definition of masculinity from you, and I'll give you my take. So obviously, since I'm already talking, I'll start by telling you what I understand masculinity to be all about. And this is also somewhat tied to a previous episode called The Boy, when we talked about boys growing up to become men and what that looked like. And I think that is at the core of what it means to be masculine. I think masculinity is perceived to be like, as you described, by society standards, that James Dean type of like character who's rough around the edges. He's aggressive. He does shit. He gets shit done. And I don't think that that's completely wrong. Right? I think that there's definitely truth in that. Mm-hmm. And I think where I understand the roles of men and women, or I should say the masculine and the feminine, comes from a place of history. Everything comes from a place of history. All our understanding of the whole world comes from history. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think historically speaking, the role of the male was always to, produce goods for the family for survival. And that usually was food.
Yeah, like
right?
A provisioner.
Yeah, shelter and food. Those were the 2 basic requirements that a man had to provide in order to be attractive to the female counterpart. And I think that because we're rooted in that history, there's a tendency for us as a culture today to still see those necessities in order for a male to be considered masculine.
Right.
Now, there's been obviously a huge emergence of this idea of gender fluidity and gender identity being at question, and whether or not, a male can actually be female and a female being male. I'm still uncertain on how I feel about that topic in general, but I am a little bit more understanding once you consider the changes of our society today. Like, the requirement for a male to be the provider of shelter and food is not the case anymore, right? We have now evolved into a society in North America anyways, where needs are pretty much always taken care of, and it's about desires and wants. And I don't think that you can categorize a male, or you can't say that you're masculine because you're providing a desire for something. That's not where we came from. That's not the root of what defined the male role in the group, or in the couple, I guess. Right? I think that because there's opportunity now for females to provide those things, to provide shelter, to provide food. Women can work. Women earn a living. Women are capable of buying their own stuff. They don't need men to do it anymore. So now you start to dissolve the idea of the masculine and the feminine in these types of roles, right? Now, we're talking about tens of thousands of years of programming that this is what it means to be masculine, this is what it means to be feminine. So it's not going to be an easy transition, and I get a little flustered when people from the left are just like, you're a bigot, or you're a xenophobic, or you're this or you're that. Look, you got to give a little bit of credit to some people who they are, they perceive the world a certain way, and that's partially due to society's influence.
Absolutely.
But there's also some biological programming there that's been there for a very long time. And so it's not easy to just dismiss or shut down a person because they see things a certain way.
Yeah.
Now, I personally do think that, being masculine is not necessarily about what it means to be the quote-unquote the man, right? I think that you can still be the man but exude feminine qualities. I don't think you have to be aggressive, rough, the very classical Western type of stereotypical male. Yeah. I don't think you need to do that anymore, because nowadays, first of all, earning a living is done so many different ways. People who once upon a time would have been outcasted in high school and been called nerds, these are people that you never would have viewed as masculine, but now some of them are the biggest earners on the planet. They are the ones who are able to provide the most for their families. So now what do you say? Are they not masculine? You would have called them losers in high school, but now all of a sudden they have all the power. So are they masculine now? Right. Did they just magically become masculine? No, because masculinity isn't defined anymore by strictly the provisions that you can provide, right? Masculinity goes beyond that. So with respect to some male wearing a dress, is that something that's considered masculine or feminine? Well, yeah, in today's society's definition, females wear dresses and males don't wear dresses. That's the stereotypical understanding of what males and females wear.
Right.
Is it right, or is that the only way? No, I'm not saying that. But I will resolve this by talking about why I believe we initially created these stereotypes. I think that humans, or civilization, to refer to the conversation we had with my best friend's brother, he talked about this idea of we're putting people in boxes at very young ages, and then if they're not able to fit into that box, it creates a lot of social anxiety, and I don't disagree with that. That is very true. But the reality is, what are you trying to do? Just remove the boxes completely? Well, think about that for a second. We created these boxes for a reason. We are just animals living on a planet in a chaotic universe, and we were basically a species that was put into existence, and we had to learn how to deal with the chaos around us. And we had to convert that chaos into some form of order. This is just one of the mechanisms that we use to create order. I'm not saying it's fixed and it has to stay this way, but this is where it comes from. So we can't just wake up one day and say, get rid of all the boxes. No. We can change the box. We can make it a little bigger, but we still need a box, because otherwise it goes back into anarchy. We become like a species just living in a chaotic world, and we're going to do chaotic things to survive. And we have to be very careful that we don't go that far to just digress into a place of no order.
Right. So, and kind of this the idea of order. I totally agree with it. And on like as a not a counterpoint, but just to kind of bring up this idea of shattering the box. Like during high school, if you if you were feminine, right, as a male, like you would get picked on, right? You would be ousted from the group, right? And that definitely comes with certain like mental issues precipitating in these individuals, right? And I definitely think that where we're going with it is that we're trying to be inclusive of these men, not as females, but as men, right? I think that's the key here that I would like to see more. I would like like fellow brothers to be like, hey, listen, this guy, he's acting this way, and that's part of this grander scheme of masculinity, right? Like, it's so weird because I'm straight, obviously, and there's obviously this need to protect like your own kind per se, right? But this is what I'm doing. I think this is the reality. I think it's just like, well, you guys who are gay, no, come back in. You're masculine. That's obviously the idealistic view that I would want, right? And it comes from being more acceptance and understanding. Like when people are not, if they don't know about it, and we didn't know about these kind of things as much as we do today, it's like there's nothing scary about them. There's, most of the time people, even in our conversation, hopefully it will get, because we're going to record it, like I think next week or sometime we're going to,
the interview, yeah.
Definitely look forward for that. But, these guys have feminine traits, but I would say that they're still like masculine.
Yeah. And you don't, there's also nothing. What about? Okay, well, hold on a second. Let's be very careful here, because what about people who are feminine in almost every capacity? Because like there are males who are homosexual,
right,
who are like they choose to be more feminine by the definition of femininity today.
Yeah.
And like, then what about those people? What about trans? What about people that aren't actually, they're male but don't feel that they're male? They're actually feeling that they're female. What about them? Do they fit into this acceptance category of like? Why does it matter? See, this is the issue, and this is where things get complex, because now we're talking about possibly absolving the idea of masculinity and femininity completely.
And I think, oh man, like I think, yeah, that you're going to the place where I want to really explore. Like can we eliminate these things,
Well, and this is the question of, can you remove the boxes?
Yeah.
Now, this particular box about gender, perhaps this one now in society today, can be removed. Maybe it's possible, right? I don't know what the impacts of it would be.
Yeah.
And I'm not discounting the idea that it could be beneficial.
Right.
Right? It's very likely that we will actually help a lot of people who struggle and deal with issues surrounding getting picked on and bullied for their conflict within themselves about identity of their gender.
Yeah.
We're going to help for sure.
Yeah.
With the anxiety issues that these people will deal with in their life.
Absolutely.
Does it hurt anybody? Well, I mean, there's some people that would make an argument and be like, well, you're messing with my value structure and the way I see the world. Possibly. But is that discomfort worse than the discomfort of a person who really like deals with, in my opinion, far more serious anxiety issues?
Right.
And my answer to that question is no. There's no way that the person that, like, you just can't get around the idea that, oh, there's no gender anymore, everyone's the same, we're just human.
Yeah.
I think that's easier to get over, and I think you're not dealing with stress as a function of this.
Yeah.
Right? And if you are, it'll be minor.
Right.
It's just a matter of adapting to it.
Right.
You can't adapt to being bullied. You can't adapt to being like, you can become resilient.
Serious like psychological damage.
That's
that
correct.
Bullying is like, it's the worst, because it has to do with this kind of idea of the hierarchy that we talk about off air, and it's just, if you want to be part of the hierarchy, and if you're at the bottom, like, you have the most stress. The people at the bottom have the most stress. Like, this is like a very commonly studied thing. Like, people who are marginalized, people who are low income, like, they have a tendency to die earlier and things like that. So like, definitely I would want to avoid that if we're trying to move towards like this kind of utopia. Like, can we ever get there? whatever. The point is, if we want to move towards that, we have to have this kind of. Here's a very interesting thing. Females score very high on openness than males. Males are lower on openness.
By statistics.
By statistics, they're disagreeable, but like this openness is exactly what we need. Like, why can't we? We're putting down these ideas. Okay, so one argument that I hear a lot, and I tend to agree with it before. It's just like in corporations and businesses and like leadership, it's like the disagreeable person rises to the top. Like it's a very commonly known thing, but it's just like at the top, to the top of what is like the company or leadership or some political party, and it's just like and what is that group a part of? It's part of capitalism.
Well, so, here comes the bigger question behind what you're saying now.
Right.
If we were to remove gender completely, right. You weren't a male, I wasn't a male, my wife wasn't a female, whatever, you get the idea.
Right.
And we let everybody just be called human. And we had this progression that you're describing where all of a sudden what would have previously been defined as a male rise to the top.
Right.
Would there still be an uprising against them for being in the top positions? Do you understand my question?
Oh, 100% there would be.
So, but they're not any different than you. So it's not like, oh, what are you rebelling against? Are you rebelling against men? Well, they don't exist anymore. There's no such thing as man or woman.
Right.
But if the quote-unquote man was still taking the top-tier positions,
right.
What would the argument be? Well, right. You would no longer say you're there because you're a man.
Yeah.
You would say that, you're there because you're more disagreeable.
Yeah, so then,
right?
it's very interesting, and I think like in a this is like super speculative, but like in a future world where let's just say we eliminate some of these genders, the genders are very useful because they make things simpler for us to understand and just be like, oh, that's a role model, I want to be like him, right? It definitely makes things a lot more complex.
But what's wrong with having a role model of a human, and I want to be like that human? Why does it have to be I want to be like that man or that woman?
I honestly, in an egalitarian world, that is exactly what. And anybody even listening to this podcast, I feel like we are people who want to grow. So we're not looking at these political things. We're kind of swiping them aside. And we're like, we want growth, right? So when we look at growth, what does it look like? Well, you have part disagreeability and discernment, and you have part openness, right? The openness allows you to traverse like a very crazy, changing environment. Just imagine like conservatives, like the planet's dying, right? I keep saying this, and 2/3 of all species gone, right? And we're still doing things in a certain way. We're not changing direction. Well, this is where some people would say like a feminine energy, right, of being open is absolutely critical for our survival. So if I say it like that, that's putting up this idea of femininity in like what we're trying to move away from, and just praising the idea of openness, right? So the males and people and programmers and women who started doing computer stuff and creating these programs, like they envisioned a world, and it was a dream world, and they manifested it. We needed that stuff. We needed that creativity, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's why I hate to use like male and female. I just like to say it for what it is. It's just like creativity and openness is what's going to get us out of this mess, right? And staying like in the burning building, not wanting to let the system go, you can obviously see the result of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the real question though is, Roy, like I understand what you're saying. The problem with change, or the problem with being open, and it's not a problem necessarily if it's done correctly. You definitely want to have the openness to explore new ideas.
Right.
But you don't want to be open to just jumping into new ideas without considering the implications,
right,
and weighing the options.
Yeah.
And that's where the other side of the spectrum, that's where the disagreeable people are actually better.
Yeah.
Because they're able to generally use logic a lot better.
So
right,
working on phrasing this new type of language is just like, well, that's why we need to be able to think, right?
Of course.
That's why we need to be able to rationale and logic. We need to have, and the problem that I see in all these movements, and conservatives versus the left and all that type of stuff, is that once again we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like, there are parts of religion that are very critical. I mean, we don't need all of it, but there's certainly ideas like, like Jesus Christ, right? Like letting your own light shine, focus on you, double down on you, and you're going to change the world. This concept changed my life, right? So it's like, once again, the left and right both have really good arguments. The people in society have great arguments, but it's just like, if you start sounding a certain way, it's like, oh, you're a bigot, or, oh man, you're just one of those idealistic. I'm still a vegetarian, by the way, guys, just FYI. So it is going straight. Going pretty well. And, technically the movement I'm part of, which I really don't really care about, is like, I am an ideology to not want to eat meat and to try to save the planet that way. It's an ideology. You're radical. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, it's just, we have to try to continually strip away all these like kind of labels that society's putting on all of us, right? And, there's two main concepts here. It's like focus on you, and ideas like for these individuals who can't come out, that's unfortunate, right? But like, once again, the conversation between me and you, this, and people listening, helps to diffuse this. So say like, you're cool, man, like it's fine. And yeah, but
So then let me ask you a very, like, I guess a very blunt question. In your opinion, do you think the idea of having masculine and feminine, or masculinity and femininity, do you think they are necessities? And do you think that they exist not as a social construction, but as a part of biology? What is your position on the idea of masculinity and femininity?
it's that's like a very philosophical question to ask me, because I think it's is it part of biology? It's just like, nature created us, and then we created these ideas, so therefore it's a part of nature.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's the most I'll go into that. I it's very complicated, but could you repeat your question one more time?
So, in today's day and age, do you think that we still need masculinity and femininity as being defined as those two things independent of each other?
In an ideal world, perhaps we don't identify it as that, but to make it simpler for young individuals, like...
But what are you making simpler exactly?
This kind of categorization.
But why are we categorizing it at all? That's the whole question.
Right, because like, okay, well, tell a 2-year-old. Like, explain this to a 2-year-old.
It wouldn't even be a discussion. The idea of masculine and feminine, the idea of gender wouldn't even exist.
Right.
You would never even talk about this. Everything surrounding masculinity wouldn't even exist. Period.
Yeah.
So when you say what would you tell your 2-year-old? Well, I wouldn't even be mentioning anything about masculinity or femininity because it wouldn't be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, this is what, but I guess the difficulty is it's going to take time if we are going to dissolve masculinity and femininity.
Yeah.
It will take time, because you can't just make people like you and I who grew up understanding what that is.
Right.
Just completely forget about it. You have to take a little piece of it away every generation that passes.
Exactly. And this is the noise that we're seeing right now, right? We're seeing this kind of chaos in arguments. It's actually very important that we have this like disruption, when you see disruption, people think, people like myself tend to revel in this. It's just like, no, this is a good sign. Like, we need to see, and it's not a crazy destruction where people are all dying stuff. It's like one marginalized group is bringing it up, and we're all talking about it, right? It's not as radical as things happening across the planet where people are dying, put in concentration camps, and if they say something, it's like, no, we're talking about it, right? And this is a little bit furry to be like, he's wearing a dress. It's like, well, that's because we're scared about it a little bit, and that's fine. It's the unknown.
It's change.
We're getting into like the unknown, and that's transformation as like an entire population. My answer is that, and I have to now go into the Carl Jungian space. It's the masculine and feminine exist within each person, right? I have this thing and I think I want to try doing this on airs, where I analyze my friends' dreams. And typically in all of our dreams, we always have sometimes a female and a male, right? So if you're a male, you're going to have a female projection, right?
Yeah, the anima and the animus.
The anima and the animus. So for males that are kind of constructed like we are, cis males, I can only speak for myself,
cisgendered
males, we're gonna have like females in our dreams and we're trying to chase her or we're trying to get her and we're trying to
And
find a mate.
that's the heterosexual part. Not you could be cisgendered but not heterosexual. So that's the cisgender heterosexual male.
Right. Okay. So wow. See, sometimes it's easier to simplify things as maybe female and masculine could be like analogies. I don't know. Like just they can be used like analogies. Just
Right.
It's diluting it, but it's whatever. The point is that for a long time in my life, like I was always the one kind of chasing females, like in reality,
Right.
And I was trying to like get the attention and trying to get a girlfriend and all that type of stuff, and I was always the one chasing, right? And I was trying to do it in a way where I was like hyper masculine, like, and some people would maybe even use the word toxic masculine, but not so much with me because I am a very nice guy, right? But I was trying to always like have the bravado, like the muscles, and like trying to make it look like I am like a physically
Tough guy.
tough guy,
Yeah.
right? I would be a little bit grumpy, be a little bit distant. I would use these like, there's so much shit on the internet. It's all bullshit, to be honest. It's honestly like you're insecure. And when you follow that line of thinking of trying to be the man and stuff like that, you're actually going further and further away from the feminine, right? And it's actually so important that you have integrated that feminine energy into yourself. When I started to realize that, hey, Roy, you're a fucking nice guy. You care about things, and you wouldn't hurt a fly, and even though other guys would be like, hey man, like you're such a derogatory
insert bad word here.
Insert bad word there, but has a female connotation to it, right? And they would call me a pussy, like legit, you know what I mean? And when I start to actually understand who Roy is, and that is who I am, I gained a lot more confidence, and like within the dream world, woman is now embracing me. And this is a very spiritual, very there's no science to this, right? But I hear the same thing in all my other male friends when they realize that, hey, listen man, I'm a nice person and my role in society is critical in bringing people together, right? That gives me confidence. And then female Roy is like, whoa, this is exactly, you're now embracing it,
right? So like the if anyone watched Inception, the movie Inception, they talk about, it's not a very great example, but they talk about these projections in the dream, right?
Absolutely. They're all projections of you.
That's right. And that's exactly why and just for anyone who doesn't know, Christopher Nolan, who wrote that movie, is a big believer and reader of Carl Jung, and that's why you see a lot of
Adler.
Yeah, Carl Jung, imprinted in his movies. So like those projections, that female that you're talking about in the dream that's embracing you is a projection of yourself. And this is exactly what's happening. And you're right, it's not scientifically been proven or anything like that, but there's so much to be said about it. And if I think more and more people pay attention to it and it becomes a more focused point of research, it will reach a point of scientific discovery. But it is very like commonsensical, right? Like you are coming to terms with the feminine within you. So why wouldn't a feminine projection of you in your dream embrace you?
Right.
Right.
And it's it's a journey, right? And I can now understand how hard the journey is for people who have these kind of deep down behaviors that they're consistently pushing down or they're scared to talk about. Because mine wasn't so bad. It's like, okay, you're more agreeable. You're open. Bosses of mine told me that I was a weak individual because I scored this on the personality test. I was more of a nice guy, right? I was not a quote unquote
A cutthroat killer
alpha.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's just like what I did was I brought the group together, right? And we created teams. And then his boss's boss was just like, yo, we want exactly what this guy's doing in his whatever project he's doing. We need everybody to act like this, to have teams, like that are so strong and will come together when they need to and are doing work when they're not being watched, right? So it's like you have this, that's toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you want to be, and I'm going to say this again because I've mentioned it again just to kind of color it in more. It's just like the real alpha, female or male, is the one that brings the group together. The one who brings the group together is the alpha, right? So an alpha that can stand the test of time, right? So, and this openness is part of it, right? It allows for bonding, allows for deviation from the norms, and but once again, there are certain qualities that my internal brain is seeing as female and male, and I don't know where they originate from. I don't know if they're biological. I don't know if they're constructed. But the point is, it's like the animal part of my brain is seeing it this way, right? And perhaps that can change over time. And essentially, that's called integrating like the female parts of you, you know what I mean? And we see it so much in like, unfortunately, a lot of like music today. It's just like hyper feminine, hyper masculine, and it's like it's really confusing the youth. And the reality is just like you gotta, and honestly, it sounds so cliche, you have to accept who you are, right? And what you are, and that doesn't necessarily come from what everyone else is telling you should be, right? So
Yeah, I fully agree with everything that you've just said. And I also want to add to it that, like, look, in order for us to get to a place where there's as minimal, basically, when you're trying to achieve this utopian idea,
right.
this is going to be a very far stretch here, but try to stay with me. The idea of the Buddhist belief system is that the best life to live is living through the middle way. Right? You don't want to be on any extreme of any spectrum. You always want to walk the middle. And the more you think about that philosophy and you apply it to this idea of gender, if you absolve gender, that's about as middle as you can possibly get, right? And if you apply that to other parts of our life, it basically, there should never be judgment for anything. There should never be a persuasion of left or right. Like, there should always be just existing, right? Like, that's the basis of the belief system, the way that I interpret it anyways. And it's like, I don't think it's necessarily achievable. I do think that we are just programmed to have a tendency to go one way or the other. But I think our struggle should be to try to get as close to balanced as possible, right? And when we do get to a place that's closer to being balanced, I think there will be less hurt, there will be less pain, but there will also be less joy, right? Like, this is the contrarian point of this, is that,
yes, like, absolutely,
we are always saying that we want to absolve pain and we want to minimize pain and minimize harm.
Yeah.
But, the concept of yin and yang is that you can't have joy if you don't have the pain. So unfortunately,
right,
no matter how hard we try, we're always going to have either nothing, or you're going to have pain and you're going to have hurt.
Right.
And then I just wanted to take a few steps back to a conversation that we were having earlier, well, even part of this discussion that we've had on the recording tonight in this podcast episode. The idea of, like, removing boxes and, assuming that we could hypothetically remove the boxes. The unfortunate part is, look, there's always going to be a bottom of the hierarchy and a top of the hierarchy, right? And there's always going to be someone who's going to be hurt and outcasted and shamed, and so let's say that we do solve this problem that we have today, that we are defining as a problem to begin with. I would agree that it is a problem, that we have people who are not necessarily fitting in the box specific to this episode topic of masculinity. So we have these males growing up who don't feel as though they're fitting in with the definition of masculinity in society today, and they're being, sort of made fun of for it.
Right.
Well, okay, let's solve that problem. Well, somebody else is going to bear the brunt of that, misplaced hostility or misdirected hostility.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's not someone who's less masculine. Perhaps it's someone who's shorter, or maybe someone who's too tall, or maybe someone who's overweight, or maybe there's going to be something that's going to take the place of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think just to comment on that is that we are naturally like animals, right? We have like this kind of dark side to us, like of old house kind of, they call it the old factory brain, right? So like, and it's very similar to that of other animals, right? And we consistently have to, and the strategy here, and it's worked in my life, that's all I can really say, is that we have to understand that that is part of us, and that we need to consistently use that front brain of ours that just got developed, in neocortex that gives us consciousness, all that kind of stuff. We have to use that to balance. That's the thing, balancing things, right? The reality is like, sure, man, like I want to just gorge on this great food here. Like that feeling of you wanting to eat something nice, that's not like, that's the old brain, right? If you want to have like sex with some person, that's the old brain. The expression of it, right, as being gay or having these weird kinks and stuff like that, that's the artistic expression of things, right? Like even for like any like sexual interaction, there's definitely the animal, but then there's also something that's a little bit more beautiful, like in artistic expression. Now, some people have like very bizarre ones, right? Like what we were discussing, but at the end of the day, it still needs to be, we don't talk about it, so we don't know the rules, unfortunately, for sure. And we instantly go to shaming that person, and we can't bring that person back. That guy gets more that woman or guy gets more polarized, right? So it's like, we should be able to talk about these things in a mature way. Which is one of the issues that we are dealing with here, because we're all just like a bunch of like 13-year-old boys and girls.
Yeah, and we pretend that we're more evolved from.
We think we're more evolved with our technology and stuff, but some of us aren't, and some of us are trying to have these conversations. And once again, this is the risky thought right here, right? We can talk about it, and it might cause us a little bit of discomfort, but we can gain some sort of enlightenment as per the discussion, right? I think one thing you were alluding to there was like the consequences of this, right? So I'm already seeing the consequences of this. It's like, for example, attraction because I'm a male, I can only speak to my experience here, and my brothers that I talk to on a daily basis. It's like having these qualities reduces our attraction.
You're saying if you're less masculine, you're less attractive.
Absolutely.
By societal standards.
I think if it's done wrong, right? So once again, a balanced male with feminine qualities, from what I observe, actually looks great, looks heroic, right? But because we don't guide people and young men to be more masculine, they, for example, they can be very depressed, right? I'm not saying that's a feminine quality. I'm just saying that like they're depressed. That's not attractive, right? So, once again, like having a conversation with these young guys to say, hey, listen, man, like you do you, right? Like, and it's not about getting the girl. That's the very key thing here. It's not about getting the girl. It's about, as oddly as it sounds in an analogous way, it's about getting the girl inside your head, once you get her, it's just like, you don't need anyone.
Yeah. You
really don't need anyone, and that's when you become attractive, right? Very fascinating stuff. Like, and just being that nice guy who's always quiet and transitioning to who I am today, and the trials and tribulations of the things I've done wrong. It's just like, yeah, like I don't care if I'm attractive. You know what I mean? As long as you actually love yourself, that's essentially what it is. You have to love yourself and what you are, right?
So let me close this out then by asking you one very quick question. Would you wear a dress?
I like, honestly, like, and I have to ask you back again. I would not wear a dress. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, because I just like, I would not wear a dress.
So I'll answer the same question. I will say that I will not, for the reasons that I have been programmed to not believe I will be socially accepted if I wear a dress.
Yeah.
That's how I'll answer the question. Now, would I wear a dress for other, like, let's say dress more comfortable? That's something in the assessment of whether you make the decision to wear the dress or not.
Right.
I've never worn a dress. I couldn't tell you if it's more comfortable or not.
Right.
But, the bottom line is, I think you and I both stand on the same page with that. We would not, for the fact that we would risk social acceptance by being an outlier to the norm. And the odd thing about that is that we're actually not the kind of people to care.
Yeah.
So it's something to ask ourselves a little deeper. Do we actually care or not? And are we making the decision consciously to not wear a dress because we personally don't want to?
Oh, man.
Don't know.
You can't close on that, because that's actually extremely a fascinating question. And just to kind of reiterate it, to make sure I understand, it's just like, yeah, it is an unknown, right? We don't care what people think of us, but we do care about what we think of ourselves.
Yes.
So that means that deeply in us there is some rooted issue with wearing a dress, which, the great thing about being human is you can choose to keep some doors closed, and it doesn't. Obviously, we're doing one resolution. More, I know, guys, because we work in construction and we work in all these type of industries where, like, this is what they talk about behind closed doors, right? They're like, "Oh, you're this and that, and you're you know what I'm saying, right?" Yeah. Like, and it's very derogatory in that way. It's just like my confidence is coming from the fact that I can make jokes and talk about these things, right? Like they don't scare me, right? But would I wear a dress? It's like I said, like I would have to do a lot more work, right? And the reality is there's a lot more work I can do in other places to gain more growth, right? The dress
so
is
it's not a priority in your head.
Yeah,
it's not part of your decision matrix, let's say.
Exactly.
Right?
Once if I resolve it in my head, I could definitely wear a dress. I think I can confidently say that. I don't think it's a hard thing, but it's definitely the statement that got people talking and thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, listen, let's bring this to a close.
Yeah.
At some point we're gonna have to, because I know we're on the verge of going off onto one of our wild tangents, so I'm gonna close it here.
Right.
But I think this was a productive conversation. I actually feel like I actually learned something. I feel like I grew through this conversation, which is not typical when we normally do this.
Really?
Because I feel like we resolve it before we have the podcast episode on air.
Right.
But today there was something in our conversation, and I can't pinpoint what it is, but I will internalize this off air, and I'll come back to you as to what exactly it is that I took away from this. But I can feel that I've actually learned something here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that feeling is some form of an enlightenment. Or on the ways of track, or just something. There's something curious about this conversation.
That's right, and I hope that all of our listeners, or at least some of our listeners, as we call them, thinkers.
Yeah, thinkers.
I hope something from this talk has penetrated into your head and into your thoughts, and hopefully made you think or question something.
Mm-hmm.
If it has, reach out to us, as always, on riskythoughts.to on Instagram, or at riskythought on Twitter. And I keep saying this in every episode, that we're going to have our YouTube content up and ready for you guys.
It's hard, guys, with COVID and all that. It's definitely, we got to make some excuses here.
Yeah, it's been a challenge.
We've had like 2 interviews, right? So just as like a little teaser, once again, we had an interview with someone who's gay, and an interview with someone who lost a lot of money through trading.
Yeah, and suffered from mental illness, which is the more important part.
Yeah, and that's the main kind of crux here. But hopefully we're going to go along with those type of interviews. We want to focus on the hurt and the suffering, because that's where the true like enlightenment can occur, right?
Yeah, it's where the most growth happens.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So okay, that's another episode. Thank you so much, thinkers.
Have a good night, guys. Thank you.